2014. A young woman disappears in Spain. 2023. Another woman is murdered. Two crimes, 9 years apart, connected by one man's pattern of violence. Hit subscribe and share for more investigative content. The devastating truth would finally emerge, but Sabora Gagan's journey started with hope in Tirana, Albania. On September 14, 1991, Sabora Gagan was born in Tirana, Albania, into a family that would soon face the challenges of separation. When Sabora was young, her parents divorced, prompting her mother Elisabetta to make the difficult decision to relocate with her children to Rome, Italy. There, Elisabetta worked tirelessly as a single parent, determined to provide for her family and give her children opportunities for a better life. Sabora grew into a vibrant young woman who captured hearts wherever she went. Friends affectionately called her CBI, and she was known for her striking beauty. Tall and slender with flowing dark hair and an energetic personality, Sabora possessed the kind of presence that naturally drew people to her. She loved spending time with friends, attending parties, and listening to loud music that matched her spirited nature. Despite her love for socializing and having fun, Sabora harbored deeper aspirations. She dreamed of becoming a teacher, driven by her genuine love for children and desire to make a positive impact on their lives. Her beauty also opened doors in the modeling world, where she achieved early success by winning a regional beauty contest, hinting at potential opportunities ahead. However, reality required practical decisions. To help support her family financially, 18-year-old Sabora took a job as a waitress in a local restaurant. It was honest work that demonstrated her commitment to helping her mother while pursuing her dreams. It was during this period of balancing work, aspirations, and young adult life that Sabora's path would intersect with that of Marco, a meeting that would ultimately define the trajectory of her future in ways no one could have anticipated. Little did Sabora know that this charming 31-year-old man would harbor dark secrets that would ultimately seal her fate. Marco appeared to be everything a young woman might find attractive in a partner. At 31 years old, he was tall, handsome, and possessed an undeniable charm that made him stand out in any crowd. He had at least one sister and had been previously married, though he was divorced by the time his path crossed with Sabora's. To the 18-year-old waitress, Marco represented maturity and worldly experience. The attraction between Sabora and Marco was immediate and mutual. Despite their 13-year age difference, Sabora fell deeply in love with this charismatic man who seemed to offer her a different kind of life. Marco appeared equally smitten with the beautiful young Albanian woman, and their relationship quickly became serious and intense. However, beneath Marco's charming exterior lay troubling realities that Sabora was unaware of during their courtship. Marco had a reputation with local police due to his violent tendencies, a pattern of behavior that had already established him as someone to watch. Additionally, he struggled with drug use, another red flag that remained hidden from Sabora's view during the early stages of their romance. About a year into their relationship, Marco presented Sabora with what seemed like an exciting opportunity. He convinced her that Italy didn't offer enough job opportunities for him and proposed they move to Spain together, specifically to Torremolinos, a Spanish municipality in the province of Malaga. The prospect of adventure and new beginnings appealed to Sabora's youthful optimism. Elisabetta harbored concerns about her young daughter moving to another country with a man significantly older than her. However, she recognized that Sabora was an adult capable of making her own decisions, even if those decisions worried a mother's heart. In 2011, Sabora and Marco arrived in Torremolinos, settling in the beach area of Laruelle. Initially, everything appeared promising, with Sabora maintaining daily contact with her mother through phone calls and social media, reassuring Elisabetta that all was well. But the promise of new opportunities in Spain would soon reveal itself to be just another of Marco's deceptions. Upon their arrival in Spain, Sabora demonstrated her characteristic work ethic by quickly securing employment as a waitress in a local restaurant. Meanwhile, Marco found work as a cook and pizza maker, suggesting that opportunities did exist for those willing to pursue them. For a brief period, it seemed as though Marco's claims about better prospects in Spain might have been justified. However, it soon became evident that the problem had never been a lack of opportunities in Italy, but rather Marco's inability to maintain steady employment regardless of location. His pattern of job instability followed him to Spain, where he proved equally incapable of keeping work for extended periods. This revelation marked the beginning of cracks appearing in the foundation of their relationship. As time passed in their new country, Marco's true nature began to emerge more clearly. The charming man who had swept Sabora off her feet gradually revealed a darker side characterized by intense jealousy. Arguments between the couple became increasingly frequent, with Marco's possessiveness creating tension that hadn't existed during their earlier courtship period. The deterioration of their relationship became apparent even to outsiders when Elisabetta visited the couple to see how they were adjusting to life in Spain. During her stay, she witnessed firsthand the bitter and frequent arguments that had become routine between Sabora and Marco, occurring even in the presence of Sabora's mother. This was deeply concerning to Elisabetta, who could see her daughter's happiness fading. Over the following months, Sabora began returning to Italy with increasing frequency. Some reports suggested she only remained in Spain during holiday seasons, while other evidence pointed to complications with her expired residence permit and her use of false Italian identity documents for travel. The situation reached a turning point in late 2013 as they approached their third anniversary. Sabora returned to her mother's home and made a definitive statement. She had left Marco for good, exhausted from trying to make their troubled relationship work. But Marco wasn't ready to let her go, and his next move would trap Sabora in a cycle she couldn't escape. True to the pattern often seen in abusive relationships, Marco's response to Sabora's departure was to pursue her with renewed promises of change. He appeared at the family's home shortly after she left him, employing the classic manipulation tactics that characterize such dynamics. Marco swore that everything would be different this time, that he had learned from their problems and would become the man Sabora deserved. To demonstrate his commitment to change, Marco took the dramatic step of proposing marriage. This gesture represented the ultimate promise of a fresh start and a future together built on a stronger foundation. Unfortunately, Sabora found herself swayed by his promises and the prospect of the relationship she had always hoped they could have. For a period following their reconciliation, things did indeed improve between them. The violence and jealousy that had poisoned their relationship seemed to subside, giving both Sabora and her family hope that Marco had genuinely changed. This temporary peace reinforced Sabora's decision to give their relationship another chance, and suggested that her faith in him might have been justified. However, the improvement proved to be temporary. Eventually, the familiar patterns of jealousy and violence returned to dominate their relationship, crushing the hope that had briefly flourished. Elisabetta would later recall how her daughter began to express increasing fear about her situation, a stark contrast to the confident young woman who had once felt capable of handling any challenge. The most chilling moment came when Sabora confided to her mother that if she wanted to leave Marco permanently, she would have to disappear completely, as he would never willingly let her go otherwise. This revelation demonstrated Sabora's growing awareness of the dangerous nature of her relationship. By June 2014, it became clear that any hope for genuine reconciliation between Sabora and Marco had definitively faded, prompting Sabora to take decisive action by leaving their shared residence and moving into her own apartment. Finally free, Sabora called her mother with joyful news, but her newfound freedom would be tragically short-lived. From her new apartment, Sabora made a phone call that would become one of the most poignant moments in this tragic story. She called her mother, Elisabetta, with news that filled her voice with joy and relief. Sabora announced that she had definitively ended her relationship with Marco and described feeling as free as a butterfly for the first time in years. The metaphor was particularly fitting, as it captured both her sense of liberation and the delicate nature of the freedom she had fought so hard to achieve. However, this moment of triumph and liberation would prove to be heartbreakingly brief. In early July, strange developments began to unfold that would shatter the peace Sabora had finally found. The first sign of trouble came when Marco called Elisabetta directly, asking if Sabora had returned to Italy. His inquiry immediately raised Elisabetta's suspicions, as there was something in his tone and the nature of his question that didn't feel right. When Elisabetta, surprised by his call, asked what had happened to prompt his question, Marco provided an explanation that would prove to be the first of many contradictory stories. He told her that 2 days earlier, he and Sabora had engaged in a heated argument, after which Sabora had left their house, abandoning all her belongings behind. According to Marco's account, she had simply vanished without explanation or destination. Elisabetta's maternal instincts immediately told her something was wrong with Marco's story. She didn't believe his version of events because Sabora had clearly informed her a month earlier about moving to her own apartment. This made it impossible for Marco's claim about her leaving just 2 days prior to be true, revealing him to be lying about the timeline of events. Throughout this entire period, Elisabetta had received no communication from her daughter, a fact that deeply troubled her. While she held on to hope that Sabora might be following through on her earlier statement about needing to disappear to truly escape Marco, Subsequent conversations would reveal even more troubling inconsistencies. During a later conversation, Marco contradicted his own earlier story, claiming that a security guard at their residence had witnessed Sabora leaving with 2 suitcases, saying she had departed without revealing her destination. As the family waited anxiously for any word from Sabora, they were certain she would never completely cut off contact, especially with her mother. The family's concern deepened as they waited for Sabora to make contact, holding on to the certainty that even if she had chosen to disappear from Marco's life without revealing her whereabouts, she would never completely sever communication with her siblings, and especially not with her devoted mother Elisabetta. This belief was rooted in their intimate knowledge of Sabora's character and the strong bonds she maintained with her family throughout her life. The last confirmed contact anyone had with Sabora occurred on July 7, 2014, when she exchanged a WhatsApp message with Marco. This digital communication would become a crucial piece of evidence, marking the final moment when Sabora's voice was heard in any form. After this pivotal exchange, her phone was disconnected, and there was no further activity on any of her social media accounts, which had previously been active parts of her daily routine. The following week, Marco made an unexpected visit to Italy, where he met with Sabora's family in what appeared to be a display of shared concern for her disappearance. He sat down for coffee with Elisabetta, adopting the role of a worried boyfriend, lamenting the mysterious disappearance of his beloved partner. His performance was convincing enough to seem genuine to those who didn't know the full truth of their relationship. During his conversations with Sabora's brother, Marco expressed apparent disbelief that she would leave without providing any explanation, while simultaneously insisting he had no idea what could have happened to her. He painted himself as equally confused and concerned about her whereabouts, deflecting any potential suspicion about his own involvement. Throughout this period, Marco shared various conflicting stories about his efforts to locate Sabora. He claimed to have printed missing person posters and distributed them around the local area. He suggested that Sabora had been seen boarding a bus to an unknown destination. He proposed she might have traveled to Argentina. He even mentioned hearing reports that she had been spotted with a dark-skinned man with whom she appeared to be having an argument. Despite all these supposed efforts, sightings, and investigations, Marco never took the most logical and important step of reporting Sabora's disappearance to the proper authorities. That responsibility would fall to a mother's intuition, as Elisabetta not only reported her daughter missing, but also voiced her suspicions about the one person who claimed to love Sabora most. While Marco failed to take the crucial step of involving law enforcement in Sabora's disappearance, Elisabetta's maternal instincts compelled her to act decisively. She formally reported her daughter missing to the authorities, providing them with all the information she possessed about Sabora's last known whereabouts and circumstances. More significantly, Elisabetta took the bold step of expressing her suspicions that Marco might be involved in her daughter's disappearance, despite having no concrete evidence to support her fears. Acting on Elisabetta's report and concerns, police initiated an official investigation into Sabora's disappearance. As the last person known to have seen her, Marco became a natural focus of their inquiry. Investigators interviewed him extensively about his relationship with Sabora and the circumstances surrounding her disappearance, but Marco consistently repeated the same story he had told the family, showing no variation in his account. The investigation confirmed that the couple had indeed separated, lending some credence to Marco's claims. However, investigators also discovered that some of Sabora's personal belongings remained in the residence she had shared with Marco, suggesting their separation might not have been as complete or final as Marco had indicated. This finding raised questions about the true nature of their relationship status at the time of her disappearance. This troubling and inconclusive situation persisted throughout the following months, with no significant developments or breakthroughs in the case. In 2015, efforts were made to expand the search for Sabora on a national level through an association dedicated to disseminating information and images of people who had disappeared under unexplained circumstances. Despite these broader efforts and increased publicity, no useful information or credible leads emerged. Sabora's determined family refused to abandon hope, ensuring that Italian media also circulated information about the missing young woman, keeping her case in the public eye. Meanwhile, life continued in dramatically different ways for those involved. While Sabora's family lived with the constant anguish of not knowing her whereabouts and clinging to increasingly faint hope for her return, Marco's life appeared to move forward normally, though marked by the same troubling patterns that had characterized his relationship with Sabora. During this period, Marco underwent a physical transformation, shaving his head completely and growing a full beard, significantly altering his appearance from the time of Sabora's disappearance. As years passed with no answers, Marco appeared to be living a normal life in Spain, but his pattern of violence was about to surface again with devastating consequences. In the years following Sabora's disappearance, Marco remained in Spain, where he successfully projected the image of a normal, functioning member of society. To his neighbors and acquaintances, he appeared to be an ordinary man who maintained friendly relationships with those around him. He was known for always greeting neighbors with a warm smile, establishing himself as someone who seemed approachable and pleasant in casual social interactions. Marco became a regular at the local gym, where he maintained his physical fitness and cultivated relationships with other fitness enthusiasts. His interests extended to target shooting, a hobby that allowed him to demonstrate precision and control. He was also an avid sports fan, particularly enjoying baseball and martial arts, activities that provided him with outlets for his competitive nature and physical energy. By 2023, 9 full years had passed since Sabora's mysterious disappearance, and Marco had established a new romantic relationship with a woman named Paula. This relationship represented a significant development in his life, suggesting he had moved on from his previous relationship and was building a new future with someone else. Paula's background revealed a woman with her own complex personal history. Before beginning her relationship with Marco, she had been in a stable, long-term relationship that had produced 2 children, a daughter and a son. After that relationship ended and she began cohabiting with Marco, they had a child together, creating a blended family situation that brought additional responsibilities and dynamics to their household. Despite the years that had passed and his apparent integration into normal life, certain patterns in Marco's behavior remained unchanged. His instability in employment continued to be a persistent problem, as he cycled through several different jobs over the years without maintaining steady, long-term employment. This pattern of job instability had followed him from Italy to Spain and continued to characterize his professional life. While working at a pizzeria, Marco developed a friendship with Victor Molina, a relationship that would prove significant for future events. When Marco later approached Victor seeking employment, he explained that he had been unemployed and his family was experiencing financial difficulties. Victor's willingness to help led to him providing jobs for both Marco and Paula at his restaurant, where Victor's sister Victoria was already employed. Victor even went so far as to rent an apartment to the couple, demonstrating considerable trust and generosity. The contrast between Paula's and Marco's work performance became immediately apparent. Paula quickly earned the trust and affection of her employers through her excellent work ethic and reliability. Marco's behavior, however, proved problematic from the beginning. This incident would lead Victor to transfer Marco to work under his direct supervision. But Paula's revelations about their relationship would expose a much darker reality. The true nature of Marco and Paula's relationship began to emerge through Paula's confidential conversations with Victoria, revealing disturbing dynamics that echoed patterns from Marco's past. These private discussions exposed a reality far different from the normal family life that Marco projected to the outside world, showing instead a relationship marked by fear, control, and violence. Paula confided to Victoria that Marco had physically assaulted her, describing incidents of domestic violence that demonstrated his continued pattern of abusive behavior toward romantic partners. When Victoria and other employers urged Paula to report these incidents to authorities, they emphasized that given Marco's existing criminal record, such a report would likely result in his imprisonment. This advice reflected their genuine concern for Paula's safety and their recognition of the serious nature of her situation. However, Paula's response to these well-meaning suggestions revealed the complex psychological and practical factors that often trap victims in abusive relationships. Rather than acknowledging the severity of the violence, Paula minimized the incidents, describing them dismissively as just 4 punches and a kick. This response demonstrated the normalization of violence that frequently occurs in abusive relationships, where victims learn to downplay serious assaults as minor disagreements. The underlying reason for Paula's reluctance to leave Marco or report his abuse became clear through further conversations. Social services had removed Paula's children from her custody after discovering drugs in their shared home, substances that belonged to Marco but for which Paula faced consequences. This traumatic loss of her children created a devastating situation that Marco's presence in her life had directly caused. Paula found herself trapped in an impossible situation. She confessed to Victoria that she wanted to leave Marco, with whom she said she no longer maintained a romantic relationship. However, she lacked the financial means to establish an independent life, while also needing to maintain the appearance of a stable relationship to satisfy social services requirements for regaining custody of her children. Since securing steady employment at Victor's restaurant, Paula had been working toward the goal of reuniting with her children. She hoped to save enough money to rent her own apartment and separate from Marco permanently. For months, she had been undergoing weekly drug tests at a clinic to prove her sobriety, maintaining hope that by October of that year she would finally be reunited with her children. Meanwhile, Marco's work performance at Victor's establishment continued to deteriorate. He lasted only a month and a half before Victor discovered that a kitchen knife had gone missing from the restaurant and felt compelled to report the theft to authorities, leading to Marco's termination. Just a few days after Marco's dismissal, Paula would face her final day, unaware that her hopes of reuniting with her children would never be realized. Tuesday, May 16, 2023 began as an ordinary day for Paula, who was enjoying her scheduled day off from work. She had made plans for the evening and appeared to be in particularly high spirits, perhaps looking forward to some well-deserved relaxation after her dedicated efforts at work. Her positive mood that day would later stand in stark contrast to the tragic events that would unfold just hours later. The following day, Wednesday, May 17th, Victoria arrived at work expecting to hear about Paula's enjoyable evening when she came in for her regular shift. Instead, this day would become the most horrific in the restaurant's history, forever changing the lives of everyone connected to the establishment and marking the end of Paula's dreams of reuniting with her children. Around 11:30 a.m., as Paula was preparing for work in the apartment she shared with Marco above the restaurant, loud screams suddenly pierced the morning air. These weren't the typical sounds of argument that had unfortunately become familiar to those who knew the couple's troubled relationship. There was something distinctly different about Paula's cries this time that immediately set them apart from previous disputes. Paula's voice carried a tone of desperation that was unmistakable to anyone within hearing range. She was pleading for help in a way that communicated genuine terror and imminent danger. The urgency and fear in her voice created an immediate sense of alarm among those who heard her cries, prompting rapid response from people in the vicinity. Victor and another employee immediately recognized the seriousness of the situation and rushed upstairs to the apartment. They pounded frantically on the door while shouting questions about what was happening inside. Their voices carried their own desperation as they pleaded with Paula to respond and tell them whether she was safe, their concern evident in every word they called through the closed door. One of the men later reported hearing what sounded like faint whimpers from inside the apartment, sounds that suggested Paula was still alive but possibly injured or restrained. These weak sounds were quickly followed by Marco's voice emerging from behind the door, attempting to reassure the concerned men outside that everything was under control and that Paula had simply returned to bed. However, after Marco's brief statement, Paula's voice was no longer heard at all, creating an ominous silence that heightened the men's fears. The door remained firmly closed despite their continued efforts to communicate with those inside, and something in Marco's tone when he spoke set off immediate alarm bells for the increasingly worried men outside. The situation escalated rapidly as Victor ran to retrieve a spare key to the apartment, while his employee went to call police for immediate assistance. Upon hearing the men's footsteps as they left to get help and contact authorities, Marco calmly exited the apartment and left the building entirely, abandoning the scene just as help was arriving. When police officers and medical personnel finally gained entry to the apartment, they discovered Paula's lifeless body on the floor, her clothing stained red with blood from numerous stab wounds, with paramedics only able to pronounce her dead at the scene. Within hours, authorities would launch a manhunt that would not only bring Paula's killer to justice, but finally provide answers to a family that had waited 9 years for the truth. The area around the restaurant immediately swarmed with law enforcement officers, criminal investigators, and medical personnel as the full scope of the crime scene became apparent. Authorities launched an intensive manhunt for Marco, based on witness statements from Victor and other employees who had heard the struggle and seen him leave the building. The urgency of the situation demanded immediate action to locate and apprehend the primary suspect before he could flee the area or harm others. The coordinated law enforcement efforts proved remarkably effective when a local resident provided crucial assistance by identifying Marco from a photograph at a nearby establishment. This citizen cooperation led directly to Marco's apprehension less than 6 hours after Paula's murder, at 5:30 that same evening. The speed of his capture prevented any possibility of escape and ensured that evidence and witness testimony remained fresh and reliable. When authorities located Marco, he was calmly drinking a beer as if nothing significant had occurred earlier that day. He offered no resistance to his arrest and appeared surprisingly composed given the circumstances, behavior that struck investigators and witnesses as unnaturally calm for someone who had just committed such a violent crime. His arrest drew the attention of everyone present in the establishment and the surrounding area, creating a scene that would be remembered by the local community. In the days following Marco's arrest, additional disturbing details emerged about his behavior on the night before Paula's murder. Investigators learned that Marco had been actively searching for Paula during her evening out, even approaching local taxi drivers to inquire about who had driven her and where she had gone. This behavior demonstrated his controlling and possessive nature, suggesting that jealousy and surveillance had played a role in the events leading to her death. The most shocking development occurred when Marco was being escorted through the police station and stopped in front of a bulletin board displaying images from various ongoing investigations. Among these images was the missing person poster for Sabora Gagan, whose case had remained open and unsolved for 9 long years since her disappearance in 2014. Confronted with Sabora's image, Marco made a stunning confession that would reopen a cold case and finally provide answers to a grieving family. He claimed he wanted to cooperate with authorities because the memory of his actions would haunt him forever. Marco confessed that he and Sabora had argued, that he had killed her, and that he had buried her body within an apartment they had shared. When investigators were still processing this shocking revelation, Marco offered to show them the exact location where he had hidden Sabora's remains in their former shared residence, though cautious authorities did not immediately accept his offer pending further investigation and proper legal procedures. As Marco faced court proceedings for Paula's murder, the long-buried truth about Sabora's fate was about to emerge from behind a carefully constructed wall. On Saturday, May 20th, Marco appeared in court for his formal presentation regarding Paula's murder, where the 45-year-old defendant exercised his legal right to remain silent during most of the proceedings. He responded only to questions posed by his defense attorney, who requested that the court order both psychiatric and toxicological evaluations to assess his mental state and determine whether substances had played a role in his actions. Notably, during this crucial court hearing, Marco said nothing about his earlier shocking revelation regarding Sabora Gagan's case, choosing to remain silent about the confession he had made while being processed at the police station. This selective silence suggested a calculated approach to his legal situation, cooperating only when it served his interests while withholding information about other serious crimes. The court ordered Marco to be held in provisional custody, without the possibility of bail, while authorities conducted their investigation into charges of murder committed within the context of gender-based violence. Additionally, the court mandated that he undergo a drug addiction protocol, acknowledging the role that substance abuse appeared to play in his pattern of violent behavior toward women. On the same day as Marco's court appearance, judicial authorities made the significant decision to reopen the investigation into Sabora Gagan's disappearance from 9 years earlier, treating Marco's confession as credible enough to warrant immediate action. This development brought new hope to Sabora's family, while also requiring extensive resources and coordination between Spanish and Italian authorities. The investigation into Sabora's remains began in earnest on Monday, May 22nd, when a large team of officers visited the apartment where Marco and Sabora had once lived together. They found the residence occupied by another couple who were completely cooperative with authorities and granted full access for the search operation. Understanding the gravity of the situation, specialized teams began a meticulous examination of every inch of the apartment, which was located in close proximity to both the town hall and the police station where Sabora's case had been reported years earlier. The irony of her remains potentially being hidden so close to the seat of local law enforcement was not lost on investigators. The initial search involved comprehensive visual inspection, looking for any irregularities in walls, floors, or other structural elements that might indicate recent construction or modification. When visual examination proved insufficient, investigators employed advanced technology including densitometers to detect density variations and micro-cameras that could examine hidden spaces. Small holes were systematically drilled throughout various parts of the apartment to allow insertion of cameras for examining the interiors of walls and floors, a painstaking process that required extreme care to avoid disturbing potential evidence while ensuring thoroughness. After 3 extensive searches that failed to locate any evidence, investigators achieved a breakthrough during their 4th attempt by analyzing the building's architectural floor plans and comparing them to the actual layout of the apartment under investigation. Behind what appeared to be an unaltered wall, investigators were about to uncover a horrific secret that had been hidden for nearly a decade. The breakthrough came when investigators noticed significant discrepancies between the floor plans of 2 identical apartments on the same level of the building. This architectural analysis revealed that there was a substantial amount of space in the bedroom of Marco and Sabora's former apartment that didn't correspond to the layout they were examining, indicating the presence of a concealed area behind what appeared to be a normal wall. Specialists focused their attention on a particular section of wall that appeared completely unaltered and identical to the rest of the building's construction. However, their analysis revealed that this seemingly innocent wall actually concealed a hollow space behind it, carefully constructed to hide whatever lay beyond from casual observation or standard inspection methods. With proper judicial authorization obtained on June 6, officers proceeded to break through the deceptive wall structure that had successfully hidden its secret for nearly a decade. Behind the false wall, they discovered a large wooden crate that had been completely filled with lime, a substance commonly used to accelerate decomposition and mask odors from decaying organic material. As investigators carefully began removing the lime from the wooden container, they made a series of increasingly disturbing discoveries that painted a picture of deliberate concealment and ritualistic burial. The first item they recovered was a plastic bag containing a knife with dried blood still visible on its surface, providing immediate evidence of the weapon used in Sabora's death. Continuing their careful excavation, officers found various objects that apparently had belonged to the victim, personal items that confirmed the connection between the remains and Sabora's identity. Most notably, they discovered a bouquet of flowers that had been deliberately placed on top of several plastic bags, suggesting some form of ceremonial arrangement or final gesture. Inside the multiple plastic bags, investigators found a camping sleeping bag that served as the final container for the victim's remains. Within this sleeping bag, they discovered the skeletal remains of a woman who had been hidden in this makeshift tomb for 9 years, finally bringing an end to the mystery of Sabora Gagan's disappearance. Following this grim discovery, the remains were immediately transported to appropriate facilities for comprehensive autopsy examination to confirm the cause of death and establish definitive identification of the victim through scientific methods including dental records and DNA analysis. Meanwhile, in Italy, Sabora's family received news of Marco's arrest for Paula's murder and the subsequent search for Sabora's remains through friends who had been following the developments. Elisabetta described her emotional response to learning of her daughter's death at Marco's hands as being hit with a bucket of cold water, a devastating confirmation of her worst fears about her daughter's fate. Elisabetta revealed that the only source of joy she had experienced during the 9 years of uncertainty had been becoming a grandmother through her son's family. And tragically, Sabora's father had passed away from illness without ever learning what had happened to his beloved daughter. As Spanish authorities prepared to contact the family for DNA confirmation, there remained little doubt about the identity of the remains found behind the wall. Spanish authorities contacted Elisabetta to request a DNA sample for conclusive identification of the remains found behind the wall, though there was already little doubt about the victim's identity. The body bore tattoos that had been specifically reported as distinguishing features when Sabora's disappearance was originally filed with police, providing strong preliminary identification even before scientific confirmation. A Spanish investigative team traveled directly to Elisabetta's home in Italy to collect a saliva sample for DNA comparison testing. When the results were processed, they left absolutely no room for doubt or uncertainty. The remains discovered in the hidden wall space were definitively confirmed to be those of Sabora Gagan, who had disappeared at the age of 22 and would have been 31 at the time of her discovery. Following the comprehensive autopsy examination, despite the advanced decomposition of the remains after 9 years of concealment, forensic experts were able to determine the cause of Sabora's death. The examination revealed that she had died from multiple stab wounds, confirming the violent nature of her death and corroborating Marco's confession about the method of murder. More than 5 months after Sabora's remains were discovered in the wall of the apartment she had shared with the man who became her executioner, her family made the announcement that she would finally be coming home to Italy for proper burial. This moment represented both closure and the beginning of a new phase of grief for her loved ones. Finally, after 9 years of uncertainty and anguish, Sabora's family and friends were able to bid her a proper farewell in a funeral service that honored her memory and celebrated her life. The ceremony provided an opportunity for those who loved her to gather together and share their memories of the vibrant young woman whose life had been cut tragically short. At the conclusion of the funeral service, friends of the young woman created a poignant tribute by releasing balloons into the sky, each carrying messages written for someone who had once been known as a cheerful, loyal friend, who dreamed only of becoming a successful model and finding genuine happiness in life. After enduring what may be the hardest moment any family can face, all efforts were now focused on ensuring that justice would be served and that the person responsible for Sabora's untimely death would be punished to the fullest extent of the law. But Marco's version of events would prove to be as contradictory and manipulative as everything else he had done. On Tuesday, January 30th, 2024, Marco appeared in court for a hearing that had been specifically requested by his defense attorney, providing him with an opportunity to present his version of events regarding both Paula's murder and Sabora's death. Rather than speaking directly to the court, Marco chose to hand over a 17-page handwritten letter in which he admitted responsibility for Paula's death, while simultaneously attempting to minimize his culpability through various justifications and excuses. In this lengthy document, Marco admitted to taking Paula's life, but included significant caveats designed to portray himself as less culpable than the evidence suggested. He claimed that both he and Paula had maintained a tumultuous relationship that was fueled by their consumption of large amounts of alcohol and cocaine, substances that he suggested bore some responsibility for the violence that characterized their interactions. While confessing to Paula's murder, Marco attempted to justify his actions by alleging that she had been agitated because he owed her €50 and that she had recently discovered his infidelity with another woman. He portrayed the fatal encounter as a defensive response, claiming his only fault was defending himself too forcefully against Paula's alleged aggression. However, Marco's self-defense claim was immediately contradicted by the physical evidence, particularly the location of Paula's wounds. He provided no explanation for how the victim's stab wounds ended up on her back if the attack had truly occurred while he was defending himself against frontal aggression, a detail that exposed the falseness of his defensive narrative. Despite his partial confession regarding Paula's murder, Marco maintained a different stance concerning Sabora's case. While he admitted to wrapping her body in plastic bags, placing it in a wooden box, covering it with flowers, filling the container with lime, and constructing a false wall to conceal everything, he steadfastly denied being responsible for her actual death. Instead, Marco spun an elaborate and implausible story involving members of the Albanian mafia, claiming they were responsible for Sabora's murder. According to his fantastic account, he had borrowed €25,000 to start a brothel business, had the money stolen by Colombians after a night of partying, and was subsequently visited by 4 armed Albanian mobsters who came to collect the debt. Marco claimed that when these alleged mobsters arrived at their apartment, they killed Sabora as punishment for the unpaid debt, took €9,000 he had hidden from drug-dealing activities, and informed him the debt would be forgiven if he disposed of Sabora's body according to their instructions. This elaborate fabrication demonstrated Marco's continued pattern of manipulation and dishonesty, even when faced with overwhelming physical evidence and the opportunity to accept full responsibility for his actions. As Marco's fate remained uncertain, the contrast between his elaborate lies and the simple truth of his violence left many questions about justice for both victims. As of the most recent available information, Marco's legal fate remains undetermined while the Spanish judicial system processes the complex charges against him for the murders of both Paula and Sabora Gagan. The latest court documents dated May 16, 2024, indicate that judicial authorities have decided to proceed with a jury trial for Paula's death, with Marco facing charges of murder and domestic abuse within the context of gender-based violence. However, no estimated timeline has been established for the judicial process concerning Sabora Gagan's case, despite the physical evidence and Marco's partial confession regarding the concealment of her remains. This delay leaves Sabora's family continuing to wait for complete justice nearly a decade after her disappearance, and more than a year after the discovery of her body. The journey from Sabora's disappearance in 2014 to the discovery of her remains in 2023 represents nearly 10 years of anguish for her family, who never stopped believing that she deserved justice. Tragically, Paula's murder became the key that finally unlocked the truth about Sabora's fate, providing closure for one family while creating devastating grief for another. Marco's documented pattern of violence across multiple relationships serves as a stark reminder of the importance of recognizing warning signs of domestic abuse and the deadly escalation that can occur when such behavior goes unchecked. Despite his various contradictory stories, attempts to shift blame, and elaborate fabrications involving organized crime, the physical evidence and witness testimonies present a clear picture of a man whose jealousy, need for control, and capacity for violence ultimately led to the deaths of 2 women who simply wanted to live their lives free from fear and abuse.